Hey, good afternoon from the farm. Hey, because we can't all be out here in person today, I thought it'd be fun to start with a virtual tour of the farm. So, to kind of see what's going on today on the farm. This is being recorded April, right after the sun came out, more or less. Down here you can see the line of redbud trees coming up to the farm stand. Really pretty this year. Seems like it's about the best blooming year we've had in years. Over here, as you approach the farm stand, got our sign, and then over on the right you got three walk-in coolers. We'll talk more about those in the presentation. Inside the farm stand, I've got wash and pack tables on both sides. Again, we'll visit more about that. That's a big part of scaling up. And then in here we've got a farm stand, a place to purchase produce. People come on in to the walk-in cooler. Shelves here full of produce, clear totes, prices clearly marked. They can reach in the tote and take what they want. The rest of the space is designated for produce storage. Today it's empty because everything's at farmer's market. After they purchase, they come back outside and they pay here in this pay box, self-service. It's just a post office box mounted to the wall. We empty it out regularly so that there's not cash left laying around. We also have a shelf for warm products, honey and potatoes and coffee, and some books from one of our interns. A lot of produce moves through here. It's not a huge part of our market plan, but it is significant, and actually increasingly so now that COVID has been visiting. So, in the greenhouse we have lots of plants for sale. Again, not something we do usually, at least not to this degree, but this year we decided with the dramatic increase in people's time and availability for gardening, it made sense to try and provide some plants. And over here you can see we've got some cucumbers just starting to get trellised. They're interplanted with radishes and fennel and lettuce. Most of those other crops will come out in the next few weeks. The radishes should last a couple months. We've got some potted rhubarb, some dahlias, and these strings that are hung from the ceiling, that's what the cucumbers will climb up. With a lot of assistance, they'll be hand trellised. Over on the right you can see some head lettuce. This is about to wrap it up and we'll be transitioning that to tomatoes here in the next week or so. On the left, some kale and fennel. Similar story over here, it'll get transitioned to bell peppers here in the near future. Back here in the back, toward the exit of the greenhouse, there's some rosemary, oregano, thyme. Herbs are one of those kind of sneaker crops that provide a lot more income per square foot than you would imagine. Flowers, we've got cut flowers here, ranunculus and anemones. Both of those, it's getting to the end of their run. They've been blooming since the second week of February. So we've got a lot of traction out of those. Some nasturtiums. Nasturtiums will keep going all summer, but their bloom rate will drop off significantly. So they're just covered in blooms right now, but there will be less of that in the future. Over here we've got more potted herbs. This is a new plan this year. This is part of our measuring, assessing, and making a plan and trying something new. And that is that we've discovered that the herbs are really a pretty good crop for us, and so we're trying to do a little more herbs, and this is one way to do them. Over here you can see snapdragons just getting started. Hundreds and hundreds of snapdragons. Snapdragons are one of our more prolific cut flowers. It's got a very long season and they're very profitable. Over here we've got our seed starting area. We've got the work table. We've got a big bag of soil. Back in the back there is our wood burning furnace. Stacks of trays. Stacks of organic fertilizers, things like that. And then over here, after we've seeded, things go into the germination chamber where they're kept at 75 degrees by a little heater in there. High humidity, high temperature. And then they come out onto the seedling table, which is just chock full right now. Actually, there's a little bit of space. We've been transplanting out a lot this week, so that kind of helped free up some space. Last week we were overflowing the table, so it's a little bit better off than it was. We've got everything from basil to blackberries out here right now on the table. Most of them waiting to go out in the field. Some of which will, like these basil plants, we'll actually harvest these off the seedling table. Our earliest basil is it comes out of potted basil in the greenhouse, and then later we can sell those plants. And then out the back door of the greenhouse, I hope this isn't sickening. I'm trying to be as helpful as I can be. It's also a windy day. I imagine you're going to get some pretty good wind noise here. But here you can see some freshly prepped beds alongside some stuff that's overwintered. So as I stand here on that left side is some cilantro that's overwintered. It's actually bolting now, and we're cutting it now for filler for cut flower bouquets. These are beds we just topped up with compost and filled the beds with paths with wood chips this week. Underneath this row cover are our earliest field carrots. And here in this little kitten tunnel, we call them a kitten. You might hear other people refer to these as caterpillar tunnels. Inside of here we've got snapdragons in the middle, celery on the left, and underneath the row cover we've got some squash. Just getting started. So this double row cover situation is a real common thing for us early season and late season when we have the opportunity to plant things out somewhat aggressively. This is one way to ensure that they stay nice and warm. This tunnel was spinach all winter long. It just got flipped last week. And then you can see a lot of the rest of the fields are still pretty empty. We got a lot of space being tarped. That's kind of our passive weeding program that helps get rid of those early annuals and somewhat perennials, although tarping isn't great for perennials. Over on our left you can see some more high raised beds with compost. We've got some green garlic here in the foreground, and then beyond that, kind of hard to see on the camera, but there's leeks in 4 of those beds. Not L-E-A-K-S, but L-E-E-K-S, as in the food leeks. And then over here in the high tunnel, that one's full of peppers, interseeded with radishes. This is where the high tunnel was for the winter. This is a mobile high tunnel. So this tunnel space has been replanted into spring crops, but we harvested out the last of the winter crops in the last couple of weeks. And now we've seeded some carrots and some salad turnips. The chard will go through the summer, and we just put some radishes into this bed here. Scallions and spinach that we're harvesting currently. Over here are baby carrots just coming up. These were planted about a month ago. Pretty slow this time of year, but they are looking really good. And then over here we've got our Chinese greenhouse, which is also known as an earth berm greenhouse. And it's a good day for an earth berm greenhouse. It's going to be toasty in here. Yeah, it's about 65 in here. Beautiful flowers. No wind. Nice and warm. It's actually warm enough that the vent fan has kicked on. This time of year we try and vent pretty aggressively because we need to dump moisture. We don't want that moisture to build up and condense on our plastic. You can see cucumbers, more cucumbers, and more cucumbers. On the far edge there, that's some celery, some more anemones that are about done, some basil, carrot beds that are just about cold. These are beautiful carrots. These are carrots we planted in October. Well, that's a dinky little thing. Let's see if we can find a reasonable sized carrot. That's a little bit better. It's more like what we're aiming for, a little bit skinny. Over here we got some squash that are just starting to make zucchini. There's a little zucchini starting to happen there. Not very many people grow squash in greenhouses, but we have found that the market for early season squash is pretty remarkable, and it seems to make sense to us income wise. Here's some more cucumbers and some basil on the sides of their beds. These cucumbers are getting ready to, or they're starting to be trellised, so they've got that single string on them. They'll go up to the wire and then we'll lower them regularly. Back here toward the compost piles, we've been working the compost this week with some with a borrowed skid steer. We trade vegetables for skid steer time, and so you can see large windrow of compost there, probably something in the realm of 100 yards of compost there. And then over here you can see some folks out dropping leaves. Since COVID has the yard waste recycle closed, people have been bringing their leaves out here, which is mostly a real advantage to us. We get lots of organic matter. And here are the pigs doing their business to help us compost. There they are. Hey guys. These pigs are the ultimate recyclers. They'll take about anything we can give them and turn it into soil. So we love our pigs. Plus they taste good. Over here you can see the covers on the kale and broccoli. They're covered partly for temperature control and partly for pest control. This will help keep the cabbage worms off of them, and it'll also help them grow faster by keeping a more moderate temperature at night. That nighttime temperature is still dropping down enough that it really affects our growth rate. So by putting covers over them, we can speed that up. Here in the back, you see some of the equipment that we're going to talk about in the presentation. This is our tractor shed. These are the onions, and we just planted leeks yesterday. So the onions are out. The leeks go in a little later because they're more temperature sensitive. If leeks get too cold, they'll bolt. So these onions are overwintered forum onion sets for the most part. Now these right here are Texas earlies that we plant from plants, but the others are forum. You can see we've got a little weeding to do out here, but it's in pretty good shape. These were all built compost beds, so we piled up about 6 to 8 inches of compost on them last fall, right before we planted, and so there's not a lot of weed seed in there. So the mission this year is to keep the weed seeds out of them. And here, the big high tunnel, Everest we call it. Everest is, I'm not going to be able to get in there because it's going to fog our camera out. In Everest right now we've got lots of tomatoes. All the tomatoes are in, so that's about 600 tomato plants and 100 bell peppers. And then we've got the sides planted into beets. And we paper potted those beets in. They're looking really happy. Again, a little bit of weed pressure there, but nothing we can't handle with a hoe and a few hours. And you can also see I've got a small torpedo heater in there, and that's to offset nights like last night when it was, or 2 nights ago, when it was just right at freezing. And we have just these temporary heating solutions to get us through that part of the season. More onions. Over here you can see more baby carrots coming up. They're looking really good. It was a great seeding, good timing. We had really consistent rain, so we didn't have to worry about watering. Normally we have to really pay attention and water the carrot seedlings every day, but these have been beautiful without any sprinkling. In fact, yesterday was the first time we ran a sprinkler on them at all. They were under row cover, which helps a lot in getting those carrot seeds to germinate in drier conditions. Out here we've got, this was where this big high tunnel was this last winter, so that's why we've got kind of a jump start on things underneath that white row cover. We've got some chard, we've got a bed of spinach that's just about ready to come out, we've got a bed of carrots next to it just coming up. Over here we've got some bolting cilantro we're using for flower filler, some parsley that we've been harvesting all winter. It's probably just about done. And under that row cover is more kale, and then beyond that there's more beds of carrots. If you've detected a theme, it would be carrots. We love growing carrots. We get a good price for them. We also think that we grow some really good carrots. They taste excellent. Out here is the beet field this summer. So we've got a number of different versions of beets. We've got transplanted beets, we've got golden, striped, and red beets. Then this section is the garlic field. Garlic's looking a little yellow. We've been fertigating it, and so we'll see whether that helps it green up. We'd like to see it really get some dark green color. It's quite possible it's under heavy mulch, and it could be that the mulch is just cooling the soil at this point, and so we're getting a slow green up. That's often the case with mulch crops, so it may not be anything to worry about. And then out here we've got potatoes. This is the potato field this year, and nothing's coming up yet. Everything's in the ground, planted, and should start popping up in the next week or so. Over here is our raspberry tunnel. These are red raspberries, pretty high-end varieties. They will start cranking out fruit usually around the 1st of July, and they'll go until freeze, a hard freeze, which is part of why they're in a tunnel, to kind of extend that season a little bit. And then down beyond this, we've got more tunnels. We've got 25,000 square feet of tunnels these days, a lot of covered space. And that's because we get a lot higher quality and a lot more climate control, both warm and cool, mostly warm, but it really helps also in summer hail, thunderstorms, things like that. This tunnel is full of peas on our right there, sugar snap peas, some lettuce seeded alongside of it, some snapdragons down the middle, also some poppies in the middle there, the legal kind. And over here we've got some salad greens, Salanova lettuce, and underneath that double row cover are some bell peppers that just went in this week. Then off in the distance we've got some more compost piles. Beyond that we've got the asparagus patch, and beyond the asparagus patch we've got some Asian pears, which also have rows of peonies between them. So everything's starting to pop. It's a really green, beautiful time of year out at the farm. I hope that we get past this in time this season for you guys to come out and experience the farm in person for the next workshop. But if we don't, then at least you got to see this much of it. And now we'll go to the rest of the presentation. Okay. So choosing crops, techniques, and tools. And I want to acknowledge right up front that we do not know all of it. We don't even know a reasonable fraction of it yet. But we have had quite a few lessons from the School of Hard Knocks. And so that's what I'm here to share is, things that we've learned partly by painful lessons in the hopes that we can help you guys avoid some of those. Oh, it's telling me my internet connection is unstable. Everybody's still here though, so far. That's good. All right. So what this means, we'll give a kind of an introduction of how the journey of our farm, journey of Sarah and I and our family in farming up to this point, and then we'll dig into the details of exactly what it means to me to choose tools and techniques that will lead you to success. Okay. Let's see here. So this is my family. Now this is a very dated picture of my family. This was about, I guess about 3 years into our farming. So, but you can see I have a big family. I actually have 10 kids. So there's a couple that aren't in this picture. And I have also, they're very close in age. So I have 5 biological and 5 adopted, and this tops. Okay. So, choosing crops, techniques, and tools. And I want to acknowledge right up front that we do not know all of it. We don't even know a reasonable fraction of it yet. But we have had quite a few lessons from the School of Hard Knocks. And so that's what I'm here to share is, things that we've learned partly by painful lessons in the hopes that we can help you guys avoid some of those. Oh, it's telling me my internet connection is unstable. Everybody's still here though, so far. That's good. All right. So what this means, we'll give a kind of an introduction of how the journey of our farm, journey of Sarah and I and our family in farming up to this point, and then we'll dig into the details of exactly what what it means to me to choose tools and techniques that will lead you to success. Okay. Let's see here. So this is my family. Now this is a very dated picture of my family. This was about, I guess about 3 years into our farming. So, but you can see I have a big family. I actually have 10 kids. So there's a couple that aren't in this picture. And I have also, they're very close in age. So I have 5 biological and 5 adopted, and this top 6 that are in the home line up like 3 sets of twins. So I've got 2 16s, 2 15s, and 2 14s, and then a 12 and 10 and 8, and maybe there was an 11 in there somewhere too. I lost track how many counts. Anyway, I have 10 kids, and they're now no longer a bunch of really young kids. So this was a picture taken last summer. That gives you a little more current picture of what's going on in terms of our family on the farm. And my daughters and son are a huge help to me, along of course with my wife. And so the picture would not be at all complete without them. And then we also work with a really diverse team, and including my farm manager, Kimby, who's been on the farm now for 6 years, and she is beyond my right arm. She's amazingly capable. She pretty much runs the place, and I take care of a lot of the things that she doesn't care to do, or that are more in my wheelhouse. And we're a really good team together, so it works very well. So we started this in 2007. Our greenhouse, our building, our farm, is a former nursery. Jim Brown owned it with his wife Irma, and they owned 20 acres, and they had built a greenhouse. And you can see down here, can you guys see my pointer when I use my pointer? Okay, great. So this was the big greenhouse, and this is what really drew us to the property. There's a 6,000 square foot greenhouse here. You saw that in the intro, but this is really a spectacular building, and that's what originally made us even curious about the property. Jim had grown here mostly nursery crops for several decades, and they were ready for retirement. And so they were excited when we bought it, because really, the next crop around us is houses. It's kind of hard to see this in this overhead, but right over here is a big house, and right over here is a big house, and right down here is a big house. We're surrounded by big houses. And so our little 20-acre piece is really an anomaly in that it's still a farm. So our first year of actual growing, we had this. We did about an acre of vegetables. We built a little high tunnel here. We covered our 6,000 square foot greenhouse. And this actually is probably a picture of our second year, because we didn't use all of this our first year. We were a little under an acre our first year. But things went pretty well. In fact, our gross sales were 64,000, and we felt really good about that. And then our profit was pretty, considering it was our second year in business, we thought was really quite good. Now, a couple things to notice up here. We had a little less than 1 acre in vegetables. We had 500 broilers, 100 turkeys, 50 layers. We were doing a lot of animals at the time. We were still doing the pastured poultry model. And we had learned that by reading Joel Salatin, which is a great way to start farming. In fact, my favorite book by Joel is called You Can Farm. And Joel was my personal cheerleader for the first 6 years of my farming. And boy, did I need it. It's good to have somebody who persistently, rationally, coherently tells you this is possible, this will work, and you can do this. And so because of that, then pastured poultry was a big interest of mine, and I thought that was a good way to start. And I think it was, but we'll get into a little bit of why we eventually got out of that. And at the same time, I was reading Elliot Coleman, and Elliot, while not quite as much of a cheerleader, is a master technician. And Elliot Coleman wrote The New Organic Grower, along with the Winter Harvest Manual and several other really good books. And his wisdom is really what has carried our farm forward into produce. So those are my two big influences that led us to this point of our first year. But things were going pretty well. We said that was the first year was at 1 acre. Next year was a 1.5 acres. This is 2009. And a lot more broilers. We're now 700 broilers, 200 turkeys, a few goats, which, by the way, 20 goats is 20 too many goats. In fact, in my experience, any goats is too many goats. Every once in a while, I'm stricken by insanity and get goats again, but it's really a temporary and usually doesn't last longer than a couple months. So I feel like it's my tie me to the mast moment. I need somebody to restrain me from goat purchases. Gross sales were 85,000, so I felt like, hey, we're on the right track here. We're picking up. It was 20,000 more than the year before, and this was the most exciting number, of course. Was, hey, we made some money this year. The year before I had still done a fair bit of off-farm work. I was full-time farmer, but I was also picking up side jobs here and there with construction. And this year we were able to say, no, we really don't need to do that much, and that was fantastic. That was really a big step forward. So what do you do when you have success? Well, of course, you magnify that success, right? And so here's what we did. We said, oh yeah, well, if I can do this as 1.5 acres, and let's just blow it up to 7 acres. If you haven't figured it out yet, that's not the way to scale up. You don't go from 1.5 acres to 7 acres in 6 months, and at least, especially not if you're not educated and prepared for that, and also scale everything else up. And try and do it, and specifically, basically, we try to do it with the same crew that we'd had before. It was not a good experience. It was very uncomfortable. As I say here, 0 sane moments, okay? It just felt like we were running around crazy, putting out fires all the time. And that's not how you want to live, obviously. Nobody chooses to farm because they think, hey, I'd really like to have a hectic lifestyle that leaves me with no free time to spend with my family. Instead, I had chosen to be a farmer partly because I wanted to spend time with my family. I wanted to be home with them. I wanted to live off the land and be part of that. And so this was an interesting year. That year we realized we needed something had to go. And so the next year we cut out the broilers and broilers and turkeys. Actually, we cut out all the pastured poultry. This is the second slide of 2010. So we lost money this year. Why did we lose money? Well, I think it's because we were just trying to do too many things and we weren't doing any of them very well. So 2011, we cut dramatically back on livestock. We couldn't bring ourselves to give them up entirely, but we cut them dramatically back, and we also we actually kept the 7 acres of vegetables. So 2011 was the year of the big epiphany. I was out on the tractor one night. It was in September. It was hot and dry. I was tilling in the dust in the hopes that they would maybe rain that night, and I was going to seed some carrots by headlamp. If anybody else has done something like this, I'm sorry. It happens to all of us, I imagine, at some point or another, where we bite off way more than we should have. And this was really a watershed moment for me. It was actually right out here. I can pinpoint. It was right here on this row right here. And I was tilling it up, and I had this moment where it really felt like the finger of God reached out and pushed on me on the tractor and said, hey, stupid, what are you doing on the tractor? And I didn't have a good answer for that. I was trying to till up the ground so I can plant some carrots in the dust. So maybe it'll rain and then I'll grow carrots for October, right? And I heard, as clear as I've ever heard anything, I heard, there's 7 little girls inside who want a bedtime story, and you're out here on this stupid tractor. What do you think you're doing? And that was my moment. That was my moment when I said, this is absolutely not what I got into this for. This is not my purpose. My purpose is not just to work, just for work's sake. My purpose was to build community, to be part of a loving place, and care for my family in a way that I wanted to, and so on. And so, yeah, it was really, it was an important moment for me. And that year we committed to cutting back. So we did make money that year. It was not a horrible year business-wise, but and cutting back the livestock was what the key to that. But really, we were still ending the day with longer to-do lists than we started. I have uttered these words: let's get out the brush hog and see if there's any carrots under those weeds. In case you wonder, that's not the right way to grow carrots. The brush hog should not be involved. So we realized, that year, it's time for a change. So the next year, we cut back to 2 acres. Now, what that meant was we were able to pull back to the home farm over here. So this was actually land I had borrowed from the neighbor. It's a beautiful field. I would love to go back to growing at it at some point in the future, if and when it ever makes sense. But we cut back to these 2 acres. And what we did when we did that was We had to reduce, of course, the plantings. But what's fascinating was we didn't reduce our yield or our profit. In fact, our gross and net grew. And so, and also I should mention, and those of you who have been paying attention to this for a while, 2012 was the driest year on record. I mean, since the early 50s, maybe even drier than that. I mean, it was extremely hot, extremely dry. And we actually had originally intended to plant 3 acres, and we got to the second week of May, and we had planted out 2 acres and realized that if we planted another acre, we were just going to be doing water triage all summer long. We were going to be making choices about which things are we not going to water and which things are going to die. Well, of course, nobody wants to have to make that choice. That's not at all what you want to do as a farmer. And fortunately, based on the epiphany of the previous year, we said, hey, let's just stop here. And so 2012, while it was a really challenging year for a lot of growers in terms of weather, was one of our best years growing-wise, because it turns out when things are hot and dry, they don't grow fungus and bacteria diseases. Now, late season, some of the pests got kind of intense because we did have the only green thing around, but we had enough water to keep our crops watered, and that was what really made the difference. So we had the right amount of effort, the right amount of water applied to the right amount of land. And so we actually ended the days with, with a shorter to-do list. We were gaining ground instead of losing it, and so that's why I say this year, frequent sane moments. It was really a good year, and it was a watershed moment for a year for us because we realized this is what we want to do. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. 2013, we stuck with that 2 acres. We put a little more square footage under cover. We still messed around with a few turkeys, but we really dramatically had cut back all of our livestock. And there's 2 really important things on this page. One is this right here, committed staff. So this is the year that Kimby came in to stay with us, to work with us. And Kimby has a master's degree in entomology. She's highly overqualified for the job she does, but she also has a son who's the age of my youngest daughter. And so at the time he was, I guess, about 2, a little less than 2, and she wanted to be able to spend time with her son and do some significant, meaningful work. So she was looking for a place that she could bring her son to work and work on a farm, and we happened to be that place. Now, I mention all that because if she had come along in 2010 or 2011 when we were trying to farm that 7 acres, she would have been gone after the first day because it was not a fun place. It was long, hot days in the sun with no real return on our efforts. It was a very frustrating place, and of course, nobody likes working at something that you feel like you end up further behind each day. So this was really a difference that came about partly because of the stability of our farming space. Realizing that we needed to just kind of buckle down and do what we could do on what we should, instead of kind of always reaching and grasping for more. And so because of that, now we have, Kimby's been here for, I guess this is our 7th year, and that means that there's such continuity now that the 2 of us can put our heads together and in a really reasonably short amount of time make some really good decisions. And we're not trying to figure things out constantly. We really are able to operate from a base of knowledge and then operate cooperatively. And so it's a really powerful thing to have a committed staff. We also started pizza night. That's the other big thing I wanted to share on this page. And so for those who don't know about that, pizza night is a really fun event that we do, a weekly event. Hopefully we'll get to do it eventually this year. Obviously right now it's out because it's a public event, but we have about 250 people come out to the farm for pizza every Thursday night. And that's a big deal. It's been a real serious contributor to the bottom line, and also to just how much fun farming is for us, because once a week we throw this big party on the farm. Everybody comes out and hangs out, and there's a lot of value in having fun, as you know. So yeah, again, our gross sales crept up. Our net profit looks stable. I mean, frankly, as you guys are probably aware, if you're already filing a Schedule F and farming, taxes, these are tax numbers, so it's hard to accurately reflect how much you're benefiting from the farm using a tax number. But I will say, here we had 5 weeks of vacation. All the kids had shoes. We all got to wear clothes all summer long, and even in the winter. So there was enough to go around, and that's what I think really matters as far as quality of life. And it's just been kind of a steady improvement since then. So one of the metrics I constantly like to measure is this vacation time. Um, I find that if I don't leave the farm, it's very hard for me to break away from my attention being on the farm. I have a friend who says the farm is like a needy 2-year-old. You know, no matter how much you give it, it's going to want more. And there's never a time when the 2-year-old doesn't need something to drink or something to eat, or it's tired, wants a nap, whatever. Well, the farm is exactly like that, and so we have to really step away to get some distance. Which isn't to say that I mean, I absolutely love being on the farm, and that's part of the issue, is that if I don't walk away from it, I'll just plow all my time back into the farm. So to spend time with my family, I need to get off the farm, and so that vacation time is important. And so again, you know, we're just kind of gradually improving. I'll point out here, this is the first year that I included my CSA members. I had 100 summer CSA members in 2015 and 70 winter. We've continued to grow that. And we did grow gradually. Our first year, even in 2007, we had a CSA. I don't know that I would encourage people to do that their first year of growing, but it does have some benefits. And long term, I think CSA is a wonderful way to sell vegetables and connect with community. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this was last year. We have 20 acres. We have 2 acres of vegetables, 20,000 square feet under cover. It's actually a little more than that now. It's almost 25,000 square feet now. We love covered production. Covered production. It's a really great way to get high quality, high yields, protect your crops from inclement weather. It just gives you a lot more stability. And so, for example, you know, even this week we've been plowing along with great weather, warm, dry, great growing weather, and then, you know, yesterday morning it was 32 degrees on the farm. And so had we not had tunnels, we would be back to square one on tomatoes, and we would be back to square one on zucchini and cucumbers, things like that. As it is, we've got cucumber and zucchini that'll start producing. Well, our zucchini we're going to start producing this week. Cucumbers are probably 2 weeks out. Tomatoes will probably be about mid-May, but that is a serious advantage both in terms of market and in terms of profitability to have those early crops. You can see we're producing massive amounts of compost, somewhere around 500 cubic yards a year. 2 primary farmers, myself and Kimby, 2 interns. We do have lots of volunteers and lots of family help. A lot of people want to know how to do what we're doing and come out and work with us. We still do just a little bit of livestock, but we have found a way for the pigs to work for us instead of us working for the pigs, and so they are a big part of our compost production. And then so we're up around $200,000 in vegetable sales and about $60,000 in pizza night sales. And then you can see there's about a $36,000 owner's draw. And so what's happened over time is our salary has more or less stabilized, grown gradually each year. But what's been really great is we've been able to pay our coworkers more each year as well. And so I think that's a really noble goal, to be able to bring everybody up. You know, a rising tide should float all boats, and so we want to respect that and make that a priority. Okay, I'm going to check our chat here. We had a couple comments, and see if anybody has. All right, great. So steps to success, kind of keys to success that I can see. It all, for me, starts with the soil. Soil is, you know, if you don't have good soil, you're not going to have healthy crops. If you don't have healthy crops, you're not going to have high yields. And if you don't have high yields, you're not going to have profitability. So all the pieces of that are tied together. And so for us, that really starts with compost. We use lots and lots and lots of compost. We're producing, like I said, 500 cubic yards a year. That's massive. I don't think it's at all necessary for people to produce that much compost to grow crops, but I think that's the model we've chosen, and we like it. It's working really well for us, and that's the idea. You know, we're going to talk about that a little bit, but the idea is not that there's one system. It is that you've got to figure out the system that works well for you. In our case, compost is a really great tool for us. And these are the key elements of it. We've got mulch, which is basically wood chips. We've got compost, which is wood chips plus manure and rotted vegetables and spent grain from a brewing company. We combine all that and let it compost for about a year before we put it out on the fields. We do some cover crops where we're growing something intentionally for the purpose of tilling it under. We have minimized our tillage, so most of our beds will not see tillage this year. In fact, I have not, let's see, have I used the tiller at all this year? I have not used the big tractor tiller this year. I have used the small BCS twice, I think. And that was really because of a screw up we had. So I was kind of, the tiller is a one way to do quick bed prep, but there's a high price to pay in terms of weed control and loss of organic matter, loss of worm populations, things like that. Oh, here's just a gratuitously beautiful picture of a little boy carrying beets. That's my youngest. Carrots, we love growing carrots, and you know, carrots and beets both are examples of crops that just will not thrive with poor soils. Carrots, even, I mean, probably the most obvious indicator of soil health. If you don't have fairly loose, friable, high organic matter soils, it's very difficult to grow carrots that look like this. And if you can grow carrots that look like this and that taste like ours do, then, you know, we can sell them for $5 a pound and feel good about that, and people are glad to line up to buy those. So it's kind of it's again one of those things where the health of the soil translates through into profitability, and then frankly too, ease, because, you know, the softer soil is easy for us to deal with. It's easier for us to weed when we have to. And of course, the better our soil gets and the more we do weed control on it, then the less weeds we have to fight. And so then the easier our job gets as well. And all this comes about because we plan. So when we plan, we're looking for several elements, but one is profitability. And so this is our list of top 4: tomatoes, cucumbers, summer squash, lettuce, and greens. I would now toss also herbs in there, although I guess that would make it the top 5. And to some degree salad greens, although salad greens are a hit and miss for us. We really prefer the head lettuces. Those work better for us. And then here are our suspected losers. Now, these are not a loser in every year, but the problem with these crops is they run on fairly thin margins, and they're fairly high labor, or some of them are high labor. The green beans and okra in particular are high labor. Broccoli is not a loser because of the high labor, but more because it takes up so much space. And so the return, dollars per square foot return, is fairly low. So, and then as I say, anything at commodity pricing. So for example, we grow potatoes, but we grow potatoes because we can sell them for $2 a pound at the farmer's market to end users as baby potatoes. If we were selling potatoes at the, you know, to a grocery store who would be willing to pay us maybe 70 cents a pound for them, that would not make any sense to us. We couldn't make money growing them at that rate. So, so part of what makes something a loser or winner in terms of our economics is how do we, what is our market going to be for those, and what are we going to be able to net or gross dollars? Let's see here. So yeah, so, and this is what I think gets more into the sort of what works for each individual. But finding your focus is about personal preference. What do you enjoy doing? I love growing carrots. I think carrots are a beautiful crop. I like selling them. I like eating them. I like raspberries. I like, you know, a lot of the crops we grow, I've chosen because either myself or my family or my coworkers really love doing that. And so that's a reasonable reason to at least start on a crop, right? Now we'll get to those other two things and say sometimes that doesn't mean that you should carry on with them if it doesn't work all the way around, right? But the other thing is, do you have an unfair advantage, some sort of special circumstance? In our case, one of our unfair advantages is we have a really great market for carrots. Now, we've kind of created that market too because we've had, you know, because we have grown these really high quality carrots, but not everyone can sell carrots for $5 a pound. That's because of the situation that we are in, and because of that, carrots make a lot of sense to us. I have friends who can only sell carrots for $1.50. It would be a lot harder to justify bed space given to carrots at $1.50 a pound. So what is your special situation? And everybody has one. This is a Joel Salatin. He says, everybody has an unfair advantage. It's up to you to leverage it, right? So figure out what you're really good at, or what do you have social connections with, or, you know, our pizza night is another good example of that, where we have this location close to town, which is really advantageous for a social event. We love cooking, and so that's an advantage to us. We like hosting, so there's an advantage to us again. But you know, I've got other, but I'll tell you that things I know are not my advantage. I'm not a big tractor guy, so I don't really understand, and I'm not really good at tractor cultivation, that sort of thing that would be required to grow vegetables on a large scale. So I'm not going to pursue that path. Others might say, hey, I grew up using tractors, or I grew up doing, you know, hay, and so it won't be a big deal for me to transition to some sort of other tractor-based vegetable production. Or you know, maybe somebody grew up with livestock and they say, well, I know this like the back of my hand. Those things would be considered, you know, from this perspective, sort of an unfair advantage, in that it's an advantage other people don't have. Well, use that thing, right? Make it work for you. And then the last one there is markets, and the markets are just as simple as it sounds, but it is, where are you going to sell this stuff? You know, I think that the idea of growing mini vegetables is kind of cute and fun, but where would I sell, you know, a case of mini squash? Springfield does not have a market for that. I have some friends who worked in Chicago area, up in Michigan, for a number of years, and that was their market. And they sold case after case of mini squash, and these squash would go for like $10 a pound because they were only the size of your thumb, but they were selling to high-end chefs in Chicago. And so their market was very different, and that was an advantage they had and a market they had. For us, planning looks like a lot of different things, but this is one part of it. In December, we sit down with this year's records, and we go through and say, what did we have too much of? What do we have too little of? What things would we like to try next year? And that usually takes us a couple of days of sorting through that and figuring out what we want to do the next year. This is our rotation plan, or this is part of how we got to having a rotation plan. And it's kind of hard to see what's on those cards, but essentially what's on the card is, what's the crop, when does it go in the ground, and how long is it going to be in the ground, and how much space is it going to take. And we took all the individual plantings of crops, and we sorted them out that way. And then we laid them out into field spaces and said, well, if we're going to use, if we're going to group these things together, this is how big the fields are on average going to need to be. And so we arrived at, we needed about 1/5 of an acre plot to have a reasonable way to rotate things. And this, again, is part of that scaling up process. When we got started, we didn't worry about this. We just prepped beds as we could. We got stuff in the ground, and that's a perfectly legitimate way to start. In fact, it is probably the only way to really start, is get something in the ground. But, you know, about 5 or 6 years in, we said, okay, it's time to up our game a little bit on this rotation thing and figure out a little more specific plan. And so this was a later thing that, you know, those of you who've been doing it for a while and you're ready to start raising the bar, this is a good thing to do. It's a good discipline. It's a good way to look at your crops and say, where do they all fit together? How do we think about these things? And frankly, even if you don't use the plan as it's written, that's fine. But at least now you've spent some time thinking about, why would I want to put the celeriac and fennel together? Or why would I think that all the onions and leeks and those plants should be in one block or not? And so there's a lot of reasons for that, like different irrigation requirements, different weeding requirements, different levels of attention you need to pay to those crops. But when you do a practice like this, kind of writing everything out and then thinking about them, shuffling them around, it really gives you a lot of good thought on how does that work, and what do you need to be considering as you actually take this plan and then put it out in the field. So like I say, even if the plan doesn't get utilized exactly as is, at least you now have the thought in your mind that you know, kale can go in a slightly more weedy bed because you're going to be able to weed it out with a hoe, versus carrots, which really can't go into a weedy bed at all. And so that means if it comes down to it and your plan says carrots go in this field and kale goes in that field, but the weed situation is flipped, then you may want to flip your plan. So yeah, the plan is not something to be followed rigidly, but it is something to assist you in thinking through and making, you know, long-term decisions. Well, I shouldn't say long-term decisions, making good decisions later on. Key elements of the plan: you need the varieties, the amounts, the dates for starting, seeding, transplanting, etc., rotational plan, and anticipated harvest dates. Now,
Not every plan has to have every element of this, but certainly you need to have varieties and amounts and dates. Those are really important. And then I like to key my dates off of the anticipated harvest date, because that is kind of really what matters in the long term. When am I going to have tomatoes? When am I going to have head lettuce? And those sorts of things. So here's what we use. It's a pretty substantial spreadsheet, which I'm glad to share for whatever good it'll do you. But it's been a really useful tool for us over the years. And this one is sorted, I believe, right here for, let's see, looks like it's sorted for the greenhouse, because it's telling us how many plants we need, how many to seed, and what date to seed it on. And so there's other information in there as well. But here we have variety off to the left. We have the category, so tomatoes. Then we have our varieties. Then we have how many row feet are we putting in? What's that spacing going to look like? How many plants does that translate into? Then we're giving ourselves a pretty hefty overage for seed starting, because some years we have not so great seed starting results. This was also written a number of years back. We've actually cut our margin down quite a bit. So we don't seed 50% over anymore. It's more like about 15% over. And then how many beds does that translate into? A bed on our farm is 100 feet by 3 feet wide. And then that tells us, and extending that out, when are we going to plant it? How long is that going to be in the greenhouse, which is the SDTM number you see there, is seedling dates to maturity. And then we have a transplant date to the right of that. And then off to the very far right, when are we going to actually harvest that? And that keys off of days to maturity. So this is a pretty involved plan, obviously. This is a relatively complicated spreadsheet, but at the same time, the elements of it are not. And so I want to point out that a very simple plan like this can do a very similar thing. You've got carrots. When are you planting them? How many square feet? About how much do you expect to get out of that? And what's the income attached to that? So this is a pretty simple plan. This came from the Three Hens farm up in Michigan. Friend Adam Montre and his wife Drew have a really cool little farm up there, and this is the way they use planting. So it's pretty simple. And then even one step simpler, this is a friend who has, he uses a big poster board each year. He draws a grid on it, and then I'm going to give you a close-up here to show you what that grid's doing. So this represents the weeks. January, it's not the 2nd of January, it's the 2nd week of January, 3rd week of January, 4th week of January, etc. And what that tells him is, what am I going to do in bed 1-1? That's what the top numbers represent. They are his beds. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, these are each 100-foot long, 3-foot wide beds. And in the 4th week of January, he's going to be spreading manure. That's what his M stands for. He has a key off to the corner that tells him what these letters tell him. And then the February date, actually, I don't know what that February, the 4th week of February, I'm not sure what G stands for. But then down there in March 3rd, that's the 4th week of March, that's telling him that he's starting to harvest onions out of the bed of 1.1 bed. And what that means is that he had to have transplanted onions, previous to that, to get those to maturity at that point. And then on the 4th of April, he's going to transplant. And then the next entry in that column would be, what is he going to harvest out of that? So if we look over 3 columns, we can see this T under 1.5, and the T is a transplant. And then you see May 1st, he's planning to start harvesting, and he's going to harvest lettuce. So we know that T then means he was planting lettuce. So again, I bring it up not because this is the system or the best system, or it's a system, and there are many systems, but all of them have these elements. They have, what are you planting? When are you planting it, and how much? In this case, he operates on a full bed system. It keeps his planting real simple. There's a couple things he'll split, but most of his things are going to be half beds. I'm sorry, full beds. Okay, and then we get into the tools and how we're going to capitalize. So we've talked about soil, we've talked about a plan, and now we're going to talk about how do we capitalize appropriately. When I say capitalize appropriately, I recognize that different people have different financial resources and different levels of comfort with financial hardship or wealth or whatever. So I'm not trying to tell you this is the way, but these are some kind of ways of thinking of it, so guidelines, as I say, that I use when I'm thinking about tools. So first off, does this tool solve an existing problem, or did I not know I needed it until you saw it? If you didn't know you needed it until you saw it, you want to look pretty closely at that one, right? Boy, I have a lot of tools in the barn that I thought, oh, I need that, and there it sits, still in the barn. I'm gradually trying to get rid of those. If you want some tools that look really cool that may or may not be useful to you, I'm selling a lot. Will it pay back in a reasonable time frame? On our farm, that's about 18 months. That's what we're looking for. And I didn't make that number up. I got that from some other folks who are a lot smarter than me. But most people in ag will say you should be able to make an investment in a tool in agriculture payback within 18 months. And so that's one way to look at it. And this one's one that I like. Is this a purchase for 100% of your need or for 90%? What I've noticed is when you purchase something that will always meet your entire need, you're going to purchase a lot. We'll use the example of a house, right? So if you're going to purchase a house that will always fit any social gathering that you might want to host, you're going to need a heck of a big house. What's probably a wiser choice is to purchase something that is going to work really well for you and your family 90% of the time, and then every once in a while you're going to have to overflow into the yard or go rent a party space or something, right? Same thing applies when you start looking at tractors and other tools. Most of the time, the difference between something that will meet 90% of your need or always cover 100% of your need is a lot of expense. We have a little 27 horsepower tractor that I'll get to here in a minute. And I have a friend who has a great big tractor, and I borrow that every once in a while. And that's my 10% need, right? 90% of the time, my tractor is exactly what I need, and it's definitely budget-wise way more appropriate for my farm. And then, is this a tool that's flexible and has multiple uses? I think this is super important. Again, not to pick on the tractor, but tractors are so flexible. There's so much you can do with the tractor. Whereas I've got a greens cutter, my greens cutter, which I do love and I use a lot, it's really pretty specific. It does one thing, it does it really well. But I can't go out and use the greens cutter to harvest hay. I can't use the greens cutter to shear the sheep. It's a very specific tool. It's made to cut baby greens off of a super flat bed that's a certain height and size. And when it does that, it does it really well. And so but other tools I like to look at tools that are really flexible and can be used multiple ways. And then the last one is, does this tool add resiliency to your system? So meaning, is this a tool that you can say, this adds an ability for me to be flexible? And so that's where the greens cutter does excel in this case, where my greens cutter, what that does is it shortens my harvest time, my time that I have to dedicate to harvesting arugula or other baby greens. It shortens it so dramatically that I actually have a lot more time to give to other things. And so in that way, it boosts my flexibility, because now I can say, I don't have to spend the next 2 hours cutting the baby greens. I can zip through there and get them cut in 10 minutes. And now I've got an hour and a half plus to weed the carrots or harvest other things or whatever. And so it builds resiliency. Okay, my top 10 randomly ordered here, more or less. I love my tractor. I really do. Every time I talk to a no-till farmer or somebody who's just using hand tools, I think I would cry if I didn't have a tractor and I was a farmer. I do love a tractor. The thing I love the most about a tractor is the front end loader. The tractor will do all sorts of great things, but the thing it does the best is moves large amounts of materials from one place to another. And vegetable farming, and really most farming, is materials handling. I mean, it's about 50% materials handling. So being able to move stuff easily from one spot to another is a huge asset. Other thing to notice about a tractor is it's really flexible, right? So we've got a brush hog, we've got a flail mower back here, we've got a tiller being used here. All of those are basically this, they're cheap tools. They can be purchased off of Craigslist. They can be purchased new. They can be purchased, they can be inherited. There's the stuff, the 3-point tractor mounted tools have not changed significantly in about 50 years. And so there's a huge stock of these tools out there, and they'll all match up with tractors, new or old. So that's really flexible, and I like that about my tractor. And then, we talked about it, moving things. I'm not sure if this is showing as a video or if you're just getting sketchy clips, but this is our tunnel moving forward. So we move our greenhouses twice a year, and when we do it, we use our tractors to do that. And so they are not just tools for churning the soil or things like that. They're also for assisting us in moving structures, moving large loads, things like that. Okay. Affiliated with the tractor is this little lovely, and this is a undercutter. Is this showing as a video, or is this showing real choppy? Videos. So this is called a U-bar also, and all it really does is it goes under the soil and it cuts the. It goes about 10 inches down, and it slices the soil right at 10 inches. And you're going to see why here in just a moment. This thing was a revelation. When we built one and started using it, it ended our hand forking of carrots, which we had spent hours and hours and hours of our life doing. The first day we used this, it saved us about 3 hours, and we almost cried because it had taken us 10 years to build our undercutter. We thought, that is ridiculous. We should have had this thing 8 years ago. So anyway, that's a wonderful tool. And one of those that's just really simple, fairly cheap. I think that we ended up spending a couple $100s to build ours. I've seen them for sale as cheap as $300. It's just a really great tool for digging garlic, onions, carrots, and that sort of thing. And this is an example of a great tool to scale up with, but really you don't have to be huge to justify an undercutter because they're not that expensive. You just have to have the right tools to pull it, right? You have to have a tractor that'll do this. And then frankly, you have to have pretty decent soil to get that tool to work as well. Irrigation is a huge tool. I often say if you're trying to grow vegetables at any scale other than garden scale without irrigation, then you're not very serious, because irrigation really is the key to success or failure in a lot of years. I love irrigation overhead or drip lines. I'm not picky. I use it in all different ways, but I love using a timer, because I find that in July, I'm about half brain dead anyway. I'm, hot and tired and running around in circles. It's just a busy, busy time of the year. And I don't need to remember to turn the water on and off. And so having a timer is really a big part of that. And so I would say, as you consider growing scale, this is one of those things that you need to do is automate. And a timer is a really great, simple automation. These are just battery-powered timers. You got to remember to change the batteries every once in a while, but otherwise they work pretty flawlessly for pretty long periods of time. You can expect to get about 2 years out of a timer like this, and they're pretty bomb-proof as long as you keep batteries in them and don't drown them. That's my problem. I usually drown them eventually. Along the lines of irrigation, having water run all over the farm and not having to use hoses all over the place is definitely one of those marks of sort of a maturing farmscape. Every chance you get, put water lines underground, because if they're on the surface, you're going to mow over them, you're going to weed whack them, you're going to plow them under. I can tell you about 50 different ways to kill water lines and hoses, but putting them underground decreases that dramatically. So get them under the ground. There's drip lines on a timer in the Chinese greenhouse. Once this is kind of a set it up and leave it sort of situation, which is great, because coming in and having to water wand these carrots every day, while maybe very satisfying in some ways, is really not the best use of anybody's time. I won't belabor the mulch layer point too much, but certainly a lot of people find this to be a real key to scaling up. I like a mulch layer, but I don't like plastic, and so we have moved away from it for the most part. But when we initially scaled up, it was a huge part of how we did weed control. What a mulch layer does is it essentially does the weeding that you need to do for the next 3 months all in one fell swoop. You go out and you till, you lay plastic, you plant your plants, and then you might have to come back once and weed the holes in the plastic, but the rest of the bed is going to be relatively, pretty much entirely weed-free for about 3 or 4 months. And that's a huge gift you can give yourself. At the same time, like I say, the plastic is not so nice. And we did use the biodegradable plastic, and that was better, but it still doesn't go away in the time frame I would like to see it go away. And if it went away faster, it might not be very useful for weed control. So it's kind of one of those things. We do still use a fair bit of it in the greenhouses, because there we can really manage it. We can pick it up and reuse it, or we can pick it up and not end up with little shreds of it in our beds. It's really helpful there as well. And again, what we're doing is creating a situation where we can set something up and then walk away and basically come back and harvest. So that's what the mulch is for. Whether it's organic or plastic or whatever, mulch is really a valuable tool that way. Here's a good example of kale. You can't even tell that kale's on plastic, but it's on black biodegradable plastic. This is probably middle of June, and these 3 beds of kale have probably been weeded once, and just to pull the weeds out of the holes, and they're producing really well. These weeds are in the path, which are really not a problem. Another thing I'll mention about this or any other raised bed system is that it gives you flexibility. And so as you scale up, part of what you're looking for is how do we make things flexible so that we can do them at this point or another point in time, rather than just having a very narrow window when you got to get all the plants in the ground. Well, raising beds and putting mulch over them is one of those solutions, because now you've got a bed that can be planted at any point rather than just when the soil is just right. So if you have a plastic mulch over something, it's basically keeping that soil in a relatively dry condition, not too wet, not too dry, but ready for plants. And that's a pretty nice thing that you can gift yourself with there. For years, we did onion on black plastic, and that is a great way to raise onions. The downside of that, again, is just the plastic, but the onions themselves were huge, beautiful, really liked that system. But I'm glad to get away from it. We do deep compost as our mulch now, and I prefer that. I think that the black plastic probably gives us a slightly earlier crop, but I don't have to deal with the little black plastic flags all over the field anymore. There's onions on black plastic with clover seeded in the paths. A really beautiful way to grow crops. And when we talk about scale, here's a good example. The difference between planting a 50-foot bed of onions and a 100-foot bed of onions is really more irrigation, more weed control, and more plants. The labor will increase, but not as dramatically as you'd think, because there's a certain amount of time to start any of those tasks, right? If you're going to go out and run the tiller, to run at 100 feet versus 50 feet is really not that much more time by the time you get the tiller out, put it away, and all those things. Same thing with laying plastic or planting onions. All those things take a fair bit of time just to get started and set up. So to some degree, scaling up doesn't take as much more time as you might think. What it does take is better management, and that's the key. So what you're seeing here is, systems that you can set up and then kind of walk away and not have to worry about them. And there's the result, beautiful red onions. Another way we use plastic mulch, and I still am very fond of this, we use woven weed barrier. It's a much more long-term solution. So these weed barriers typically last something around 15 to 20 years. We haven't had any that long, but that's because we haven't been doing it that long. We definitely have some that are 10 years old. And here's Cami burning holes in these with a tin can template and a blowtorch. And so we'll burn holes in them on a 6x6 pattern or a 1-foot pattern or whatever, and we're going to use those for the kind of longer term crops. So these are our snapdragons are often planted into this sort of thing, or a lot of our cut flowers get planted into landscape fabric. And here's a good example of a system. So here's a spacing frame, we would call this. And you can't see it very well in here, but there are marks on these boards every 6 inches. And so when we go through to plant onions like this, we know this is where the onion plant goes, and this is where an onion plant goes, and so on. If you want to get long, beautiful parallel rows, which is what's going to give you your best yield because everything's got the same spacing, then this is one way to go about that. And this also allows you to turn your onion planting over to maybe a slightly less skilled crew or something like that, instead of trusting that everybody will be able to eyeball 6 inches in square. Instead, you're giving them a tool that works really well. There's garlic overwintered in black plastic. A beautiful garlic crop that year. And here's landscape fabric, and that's that different spacing. This is the single rows. This is growing cucumbers. And so you can see the advantage here. If we end up weeding, we're gonna weed maybe, what is that, maybe 1% of the bed that's not covered. Very small amount that we would actually have to go in and weed. And the rest of it is gonna have the weeds excluded by the nature of the fabric. All right. Wash and pack. You're going to spend about, on a typical vegetable farm, you're going to spend about 50% of your time washing, packing, and marketing. So it makes a lot of sense to spend time and energy and resources making sure that's as efficient and optimal as possible. So one trick to this is getting both hands free. So, rather than having to put things underwater, either put them in a situation where you can just dunk them and use both hands and move. This is a triple wash that we're doing here with the spinach. We're going from sink to sink to sink. Or actually, it might be the other way, going from here to here to here. And we're just picking up big bundles and dumping them in and dumping them and dumping them. And then at the end, it's going into a salad spinner. But we're able to do all of that with both of our hands involved. This is the same thing. Baron is washing carrots here with a rigged washer that is stable, so we can turn it on, and then it stays about a foot above the wash table. And now you can use both hands to wash the carrots, and it's much faster than if you were trying to, hold a washing a hose nozzle in one hand and wash, hold the thing you're washing in the other. Two hands better than one. There you go. Another good shot of that. And this is a really great one. This is one that David, our farm maintenance guy, came up with. This is a brilliant thing. This is just one of those flexible water wands from Lowe's. And he mounted it to a hinge and stuck it to a post and put a hose on it. So now we've got this permanently mounted sprayer. You can choose different spray patterns. It's got a lock-on handle. So you can lock it on. It washes. As long as you've got it on, you've got both hands to do your work with. It dramatically increases your speed of washing something. And then the other thing I'll point out is protective gear, right? So we do a lot of winter production. So these gloves and aprons are not just a matter of fastidiousness. They're a matter of being comfortable and warm and being able to work longer hours and more efficiently. When you're cold, you're inefficient and uncomfortable. So pay attention to that, right? Doesn't want to go forward. There we go. Cold storage. We have several different types of cold storage on the farm, walk-in coolers. We have several different spaces. I'll try and show you this this video. I'm not sure if I hope it'll come through. We use pallets, mini pallet systems that's mini, M-I-N-I, to move materials in and out of the cooler. And what that does is it gets the load off our backs. So, when we were just doing a few hundred pounds of produce a week, that was one thing. We're now sending somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000 or 3,000 pounds of produce to market a week. We need to not be lifting that with our back. And so this little simple tool here allows us to pick it all up with a dolly and move it in and out of the coolers that way. We have concrete floors everywhere, which allows us to wheel everything everywhere it's going to go. And that's dramatically improved our workflow and made a big difference in how we can, how much materials we can handle, right? Seedling heat, as you up your game in terms of size, you also have to up the number of seedlings you're raising. And the one thing that we found to be really key to having a lot of healthy seedlings is giving them bottom heat. And so our system is an under table heat. It's a hydronic heating system. There's a lot of different types of heat, but hydronic is the easiest one to scale up. And because I'm a bit of a plumber, it's the easiest one for me to work with. I'm a little more leery of electricity than I am of water. And so, water will get you wet. Electricity will electrocute you. So I've always thought when I can, I go with hot water. And then this was a really simple, but huge addition to our farm, which is the germination chamber. And it's obviously just a broken old reach-in cooler. They're easy to come by. I think we paid $50 for this. It's probably scrap price. And we put our trays of seedlings in there. We've got a little heater so it's a cheap little heater on a nice expensive thermostat. We want to control the temperature precisely, and it takes a tiny little heater to keep it up at about 80 degrees. And in here, we get really high germination rates. The more time and money you're spending on starting seeds, the more you want to make sure that every seed you start ends up being harvested. And one big key to not having losses there is getting all your seeds to germinate. And so germination chamber is huge. And then along those same lines, the more you spend on seeds, the more carefully you want to place them. This is not the most careful seeder. This is an earthway seeder, which they say, the nice thing you say about an earthway is that if you can walk a straight line, it'll put them in a straight line. It is not a precision seeder in exactly the sense that you would hope, but it will, for $80, it'll get a lot of seeds in the ground in a pretty short order, and it'll do a decent job of it. We used the Earthway as our primary seeder for many years. We've now graduated to a Jang, which is Jang, and we really like our Jang. And then if you're going to apply any materials, a backpack sprayer is so much better than a hand pump sprayer. And we really like our electric backpack sprayer. It's way, way, way easier to use than our old one that had the crank handle on it. And so, yeah, and like I said, as you scale up, some of these things just make sense scale-wise. If you're going to grow 600 tomato plants and you're going to need to spray them every once in a while with BT to knock down the fruit worms, then having a tool like this is really important. And then probably our all-time favorite tool is our golf cart, because everything on our farm used to move like this or be carried in crates. And we're kind of got a spread out farm for the scale that we're growing on. We're kind of scattered out a bit. And so our golf cart is a wonderful tool. We've actually got 3 golf carts now, and we've built flatbeds on the backs of them. And they're just tremendous tools for us. Also great baby feeding stations. So there you go, multi-purpose. Oh, and I couldn't quit at 10. So this is also our dump trailer. We absolutely love this. And it's specific to us because we do have access to a tremendous amount of organic matter. We haul the fairgrounds manure, and so that's largely what our compost is built out of, but we love our dump trailer. And then this is the greens harvester that I mentioned earlier, and I've found this to be a really great tool for us. It makes much shorter work of managing those baby greens, cut baby greens, than when we were doing it with a knife. What Cammie just did there with the greens cutter was easily 10 minutes of knife cutting. So it's better by a factor of 60 than anything else we can do. So that's a nice tool. Fairly expensive tool, but it pays for itself very quickly. Oh, and this is my other favorite tool, my neighbor's tractor. So the best tractor you can have is the one you don't have to own, but you still get to use every once in a while. All right, and then last little segment here, as we think about marketing, as you think about scaling up, it's tempting to say, let's grow a whole bunch of vegetables and we'll sell them wholesale. Well, that's a viable model, but do remember that the higher volume you're selling, typically the lower the price. And so the best way to think of it is, how can I maximize my volume, maximize my pricing, and then meet the volume that I can sell at that pricing. At least that's the way we look at it. And that means going as far down the user chain as we can. So we're going to try and sell to either restaurateurs who are going to cook our food and sell it, or actual purchasers who are going to eat it. What we're trying to avoid is selling to someone who's going to be a middleman who has to mark it up, because the produce markup is typically about 100%. That's a huge markup. And there's good reasons for that, because they have high spoilage. It's a very fragile crop, right? So they're going to lose a certain amount of it. And so there's good reasons they have to mark it up that way. But what that leaves us as farmers is kind of holding the bag on that. And so we need to seek out the highest price we can find. And so for us, that's farmers markets and CSA, community supported agriculture. And then, like I say, restaurant sales have for us been pretty close to retail price as well. I know that's not true for everybody, but for the most part, restaurants are buying small enough quantities. They really aren't justifying a big volume break, and they care a lot about quality. So if you can produce a high quality product, restaurants are often willing to compensate you for that by paying full retail. And this is our favorite way. We love community supported agriculture, and this is why. Because we're people. And so we love having people come work with us. We love having people that we connect with, people who we know and have worked alongside of, and who we know when they're having babies, we know when they're having good times and bad times, and they have worked with us through some of those rough times, like harvesting leeks and icy days and things like that. So that's really the key that we think. A couple of resources as you think about this. Now these are all produce resources. I did mention Joel Salatin earlier. Joel is a great resource for general farming, but if you start to get specific about produce farming, then this is really my go-to bibliography. J.M. Fortier is standing on the shoulders of Eliot Coleman, so they are very much along the same veins, but J.M. wrote about 20 years later than Eliot, and so he includes a lot of new technology. Now, Eliot has since revised the New Organic Grower. He actually republished it in 2018, so it's got a lot of the same more technical, more modern information than what it had. The original publication, I think, was in '95. J.M. Fortier is a French market gardener, well, a French-Canadian market gardener. Really nails the how to make a living on a very small acreage. And Ben Hartman is along the same vein. Ben really focuses in on how to be efficient. And this is not efficiency in some sort of like, I don't know, corporate unpleasantness. This is more efficiency in the sense of how do I do things in a way that I get the maximum return for my effort and the maximum profit for my effort, so that I free up time to do other things. And that other things can be growing more vegetables, or it can be taking your kids to the creek. You get to choose what you do with your time, but being efficient leads us to having more time to choose. And then Andrew Mefford, when you get into greenhouse growing, he's a tremendous resource there, really drills down into best practices for growing under protected spaces. And then Pam Dalling, I mentioned, she's got actually another book as well called the Hoop House Handbook, I think is what she calls it. The Sustainable Market Farm is a really great resource, in part because Pam is tremendously detail oriented. And secondly, so she has a lot of data and statistics and charts, all kinds of great things like that. Also, she has she grows in more of our climate than anybody else on this list. So most of these folks are from a lot further north than us. Mefford is in Maine, Hartman is in Michigan, or Indiana, I mean. Coleman is in Maine, and Fortier is in Quebec. So all of them are significantly different climates than us, but Pam Dalling is in coastal Virginia. A little different than us, but definitely has more of our challenges in terms of heat and moisture and things like that. So Pam's a great resource. So all these are highly recommended, and they're very cheap education. You'll easily make your money back very quickly in reading these books, as far as saving yourself time and energy and resources. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm glad to take a few questions if anybody wants to ask stuff. And I appreciate you all being here and taking the time to listen. So yeah, open to any questions if anybody has something they want to ask.
Hey, Curtis, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey there. I was wondering, I put it in the chat, but do you use the same soil from your gardens for your seedlings, or is that a different mixture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do use a seed starting mix, and we've kind of played around with different mixes over the years. We really like Elliott Coleman's soil blocking mix from that new organic grower. That was a great mix if you want to do it yourself. Interestingly, Elliott has now been growing in a mix that he gets from Vermont Compost for the last 20 years. So Elliott has moved away from his own mix, and that's mostly because it's a lot of labor to mix your own potting soil. Most growers are growing in a compost-based peat and perlite type of mix, or peat and vermiculite. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. But that's the answer. Is it's really better. Seed starting is much more easily accomplished, and it's easier to keep them healthy in a sort of a mixed soil rather than just using your own garden soil.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, and Heath, I should have mentioned too, we are using, this year, we're using a product from Morgan Composting, and we really like that. We've also used Happy Frog, I believe is the name of it. And that's one that's easy to access. It's on the shelf at most of the garden centers, and it works really well. It's an excellent potting soil. The reason we don't use it on our scale is just because we're buying soil now in 1,000 pound totes, and Happy Frog would be prohibitively expensive at that scale. But we do, I think Happy Frog is a really great potting soil that I can feel really good about recommending.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm always available. So if you have other questions, feel free to email or text me. Actually, text is the best way to get a hold of me. Is there another question there? Yeah.
What was your netting that you used on your cucumbers there in your
right
tunnel?
Yes. So that's a netting called Horta Nova. I believe that's HORTINOVA. And it's made by a company called Tenax, TENAX, I believe. And strangely enough, the most reasonable place to purchase that now is Amazon. Go figure. And you can get it other places as well. But it's pretty standard. There'll be different sizes. We like I believe it's a 6.5 foot piece. So it's, I think, 80 inches tall, basically 88 inches, something like that. And but they're also, when we use it for flower trellising, which is more of a horizontal trellis, we'll use the 4 foot wide stuff. But either way, yeah, that's a great product, and it's pretty reusable. It really doesn't wear out unless you get tear it up. But as far as longevity, it's quite durable.
Say, with the city compost facility closed right now, where's a good place to get compost and other organic material if you don't make that much?
Man, what a disaster, right? We actually use a fair bit of city compost as well to top up our direct seeded beds because it's such a great compost. So I've been sending people to Hanson's. They had some good compost. The last person I sent there said that what they ended up getting was a little wood chippy. And I think probably what's happening is they're just pushing it out the door so fast because they've got such demand, because they're the only show in town now. It's possible that in the past we've been able sometimes to get compost from John Deere, which is not actually a John Deere. It's a yard maintenance center out on South Campbell, and then Load and Go sometimes has compost. But yeah, I think it's a real problem, and I keep trying to put pressure on the city to reopen that. I just don't see that as a real. It doesn't make sense to me. It seems like a very low risk thing for them to do. So send them a note. Tell them you need compost.
That was my thought, because I'm like, they got a dude and a loader and one other machine there, and a guy at a window.
I've never been within 10 feet of that guy.
You can do touchless pay as you go in, so nobody touches anything. That's all they have to do is add a touchless pay device.
It's not rocket science. It's just it's a good example of one size fits all regulations. And so yeah, it's a shame because I think there's never been a year when more people wanted to garden or fix up their yard, and yet here we are unable to access this stuff. So I really do think sending a note to a city council person or to a city manager or something is not a bad thing to do. I've done it myself a couple times already, and I'm going to keep harassing them until they open the thing up, because how else are we going to get them to do it, right? It is a necessary thing. I think it's legitimately essential, and in part because they've created a dependency, right? We all recognize it as the compost to use, and then in part just because it's food. It's not something. We're not going to put anybody at risk by having the guy load up our compost. So, yeah, good questions.
Curtis, what was your the John Deere compost?
So there is a company down on South Campbell, and honestly, I haven't done business with them in a few years, but it's called John Deere, I believe, and they have irrigation equipment, and they used to have compost to load up as well. Also pallets of rock and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a landscape supply. I think it might have been called John Deere Landscape Supply. Not the same as McMullen. McMullen might also have compost. I have not pursued that. I'm not sure. Fortunately, we bought a few yards of city compost right before it was actually last fall. And so we had a little bit ready to put on the top of beds. Which, yeah, I think, in hindsight, in an effort to be resilient in the future, I'm going to keep doing that, because plus it really gets much nicer over the winter. It mellows out a lot. It's a much nicer compost by the time spring rolls around. So I see some I told you so happening. Yeah.
The Hanson's compost, where are they located?
Hanson's is kind of a little bit south of Nixa. And it's actually Hanson's Tree Service, I believe. And then usually they make some really good compost, I've been told. Like I say, I think this year they're just running out of supply, and so they're probably pushing it through too fast, just trying to keep people in compost. All right. Anything else?
Thank you, Curtis.
You're welcome. Thanks for showing up, guys. thanks for coming out on it's a beautiful spring day. It finally is. So I'm going to go out and play in the dirt.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.